6 in the morning, and she's already up before any of the kids. 5 of them, ages 3 through 12, all asleep down the hall, and she's the only adult in this house, and has been for 3 weeks now, and will be for another 5 before he's due back. She lights the stove. She starts the coffee. She checks the calendar on the wall, the one where she's been crossing off days since he left, not out of impatience exactly, just so she knows where she stands. Her husband is somewhere in Texas right now, working an oil rig 2 states away, sending money home every payday and a letter maybe every 10 days if the mail runs on schedule. She hasn't seen him in 3 weeks. She won't see him for 5 more. And if you'd asked her, right then, standing at that stove at 6 in the morning, whether her life was hard, she probably would have looked at you a little confused by the question. Hard compared to what? This was just what a week looked like. I want to tell you her story today, or really the story of thousands of women like her, because I think it's one of the most quietly remarkable things about this era, and almost nobody talks about it. Here's what I find genuinely striking about this. It wasn't rare. In the 1950s, an enormous number of American men worked jobs that took them away from home for weeks or months at a stretch, and their wives simply ran the household alone, as a matter of course, without it being treated as some kind of crisis or exception. Oil work was one of the biggest of these. The post-war oil boom across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana pulled hundreds of thousands of men into rig work that kept them living in company camps or boarding houses near the fields for weeks at a time, home for a short stretch, then gone again. Railroad work did something similar, conductors and engineers running long routes that kept them away for days at a stretch, sometimes longer. Merchant marine sailors might be gone for months on a single voyage. Traveling salesmen, an enormous category of employment in an era before overnight shipping and internet ordering, made a lot of that legwork unnecessary, covered territories that could keep them on the road 5 days a week, every week. And military service, of course, sent husbands to bases and postings, sometimes overseas, for stretches that dwarfed even the oil rig schedules. Put a number on it, and the scale is genuinely hard to picture. Some estimates from labor historians studying this period suggest that at any given time in the 1950s, well over 1 million American households had a husband working away from home for extended stretches, sometimes considerably more during boom periods in specific industries. That's not a small, unusual arrangement. That's a genuine, common shape that American family life took all across the country, and it fell on the wife left at home to make it work. If this is the kind of real, human history you enjoy hearing about, go ahead and subscribe to Back Home in America, because we tell stories exactly like this one every single week. So let's go back to her, because I think the specifics matter more than the general picture. 5 kids means, first, that somebody has to be awake and functioning at basically every hour, because a 3-year-old doesn't respect a schedule, and a 12-year-old still needs supervision even when they act like they don't. She's doing every single meal. We've covered on this channel before exactly how much labor that actually involved in this era. 3 meals a day, cooked from scratch, for 6 people, with no dishwasher and probably no help. She's doing the laundry for 6 people by herself, likely with a wringer washer that took the better part of a full day once a week. She's handling every scraped knee, every fever, every nightmare at 2 in the morning. Alone. Because there's no one else in the house to hand it to. And she's also doing everything her husband would normally be doing. If there was a normally. Money management, since the paycheck came home by mail or by wire, and she had to make it stretch across rent or a mortgage payment. Groceries, and whatever else 5 kids needed that month. Discipline. Because when the 12-year-old and the 10-year-old get into it, there's no dad walking in the door to settle things. It's her. Every time. Repairs around the house, at least the ones she could manage herself or trade a favor with a neighbor to get done. She wasn't running half a household. She was running the whole thing, on her own, for weeks at a stretch, and then doing it all over again a few weeks after he came home and left once more. Let me actually walk you through what one of her days looked like, because I think laying it out hour by hour is the only way to really feel the size of what she was carrying. 6 a.m. She's up first. Coffee on, breakfast started for 6 people before anyone else is awake. By 7, the older kids are up and being fed, dressed, and pushed out the door for school, while the 3-year-old is underfoot the entire time, needing attention she doesn't fully have to give. Once the older ones are gone, there's the house itself. Dishes from breakfast, yesterday's laundry to hang or bring in, a floor that needs sweeping. All of it happening with a toddler who needs watching every single minute. If it's a shopping day, that means loading whichever young kids aren't in school into a wagon or onto a bus, buying only what she can actually carry home herself, because there's no one to help unload the car. There often wasn't a second car at all. By early afternoon, she's already thinking about dinner. And by 3, the older kids are home from school, needing snacks, homework help, and someone to referee whatever fight has broken out between them in the last 10 minutes. Dinner gets cooked, served, and cleaned up, same as always, for 6 people. And then there's baths, bedtime stories, arguments about bedtime itself, and finally, once every child is actually asleep, maybe 45 minutes where she sits down for the first time since 6 that morning. And somewhere in that same day, she's also managing whatever bill came due, writing back to her husband, or simply sitting with the specific, quiet worry of not having heard from him in longer than usual. Then she goes to sleep, and the next morning, she gets up and does the entire thing again, for another 5 weeks, alone. Now here's the part that I think is genuinely the heart of this story, and it's the part that surprises people the most when they actually sit with it. She generally didn't describe any of this as hard. This isn't because it wasn't hard. It absolutely was, by any honest measure. It's because the entire culture around her simply didn't have a category for calling it that. There was no language in 1955 for single parenting, not as we'd use the term today. Because she wasn't a single parent in any official sense. She had a husband. He just wasn't there most of the time. There was no community conversation happening anywhere about the mental load of solo parenting. No magazine articles offering her tips, because the assumption baked into the whole culture was that this was simply what a wife did when her husband's job required him to travel. Full stop. The same unremarkable way people described any other ordinary household task. And I think this tells you something real about how much a culture's language shapes what people are even allowed to notice about their own lives. If nobody around you has ever suggested that raising 5 kids alone for 5 weeks at a stretch is a genuinely demanding, exhausting task worth naming, you're a lot less likely to experience it that way yourself, even while you're living through the actual exhaustion of it. She wasn't suppressing a complaint. In a very real sense, the complaint didn't fully exist yet, because the vocabulary for it hadn't been built. We're getting into the part of this story I find most worth sitting with, and if it's landing for you, a like on this video genuinely helps more people find their way to this kind of honest, human history. I want to talk about what actually held her up during these stretches, because it wasn't nothing, and it wasn't just grit either. Neighbors mattered enormously. In towns and neighborhoods where everyone genuinely knew everyone, a woman managing alone for weeks could usually count on real, practical help. Another mother down the street watching her kids for an afternoon so she could get groceries done without 5 children in tow. A neighbor man fixing something around the house that needed a level of strength or tools she didn't have on hand. Someone checking in simply because that's what neighbors did. Extended family, when it lived close by, filled in the same way. A grandmother a few blocks over, a sister across town. Letters were the other real lifeline, and I think we underestimate how much they mattered emotionally in an era before a phone call home was cheap or easy. A letter arriving from Texas wasn't just news. It was proof he was alive, proof the money was coming, proof this stretch had an end date attached to it. Women in this position often kept every single letter, tied in ribbon, in a box, for the rest of their lives. And reading some of those collections today, preserved in historical archives and family collections, You get a genuine sense of two people trying to stay a single family across real physical distance, using nothing but the mail and whatever trust they'd built before he left. I want to be honest here, because I don't think this channel does anyone any favors by making this sound purely admirable without any real cost attached to it. The isolation could be genuinely brutal, especially for women without close family or a tight-knit neighborhood nearby. Loneliness in this arrangement was real and largely unaddressed by a culture that didn't have language for it. Marriages under this kind of extended separation faced real strain. And while plenty survived and even thrived under it, plenty others didn't. The specific loneliness and disconnect of a marriage lived mostly through letters and short visits, taking a genuine toll that doesn't show up in the nostalgic version of this story. And for the kids, growing up with a father who was, in a very real sense, a visitor in his own house every few weeks, shaped family relationships in ways that varied enormously, sometimes for the better, sometimes leaving real distance that never fully closed. So, I don't want to tell you this was simply a beautiful, uncomplicated arrangement that everyone handled with quiet grace. Some women thrived in this role, genuinely enjoyed the independence and authority it gave them over their own household. Others were worn down by it, in ways nobody around them had the vocabulary to notice or address. Both of those things were true, often for different women living what looked, from the outside, like the exact same arrangement. Here's what I keep thinking about with this one. We tend to imagine 1950s family life as fundamentally traditional in a very specific, narrow way. Dad at work 9 to 5, home every night for dinner, mom running the house in between. And for a lot of families, that's genuinely what it looked like. But for over 1 million households at any given time, the actual shape of the family was something considerably more complicated. Weeks of one parent running everything alone. A father who was more letter and paycheck than daily presence. A mother whose competence and independence the culture around her simply refused to fully name or credit. I think there's something worth taking from that, honestly. The women who did this weren't unusual or exceptional in their own time, even though what they were managing was, by any fair measure, genuinely exceptional. They were just doing what needed doing, the way people mostly do, without waiting for anyone to hand them the right word for it first. If your own mother or grandmother held a household together like this, while a husband worked oil, rail, the road, or a military posting far from home, I would genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. These are exactly the stories that tend to disappear first, because nobody ever thought to write down something that felt, at the time, like just an ordinary week. If you want more of this kind of honest, human-scale American history, subscribe to Back Home in America. There's a lot more of it waiting to be told. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.